Hello, everyone, and welcome to this lunchtime Tortoise Think-In. My name's Giles Whittell. I'm an editor at Tortoise, and I'm being beamed to you, as we all are to each other, by a technology that consumes electricity, but also, possibly, arguably, is the key to controlling climate change. The question before us today is our dependence on technology sustainable? Could hardly be more urgent. We're a week away from COP26 starting in Glasgow, from where one of our invited speakers joins us. As far as we know, Xi Jinping will not be there. Tortoise will be, of course. The US envoy, John Kerry, will be there, but he's been managing down expectations, and he's also notably put his faith, as some of his predecessors in other administrations in the White House have, in technologies that he admits in some cases have yet to be invented. I hope that over the course of the next hour we can bring into focus, even if we can't answer definitively, the question, the balance between the large and growing carbon footprint of tech generally, but more particularly ICT, information and communications technologies, on the one hand, and their potential benefits in terms of climate on the other. Speaking as a layperson in this, my impression is, and I suspect that it's shared by a lot of people, that that potential is huge. We just don't know. I just don't know how huge. We've just seen some sort of parameter setting numbers in the slides, but I also noted that, and again, our guests are going to correct me if I'm wrong, as it stands, the tech sector accounts for between 3 and 4% of global emissions, which is more than aviation, which gets a much harder time from the media at any rate for carbon emissions. We are moving into the age of 5G, which we are all told we will need, which will mean more data, more storage, more power, by some estimates 5 times more power demand for the 5G network than current wireless networks by 2035. But we're also told that these very technologies are key to making the Internet of Things work, a whole variety of coming improvements to our lives, and potentially shrinkages in our net carbon footprint, from everything from traffic control to distributed power, and, as I think we'll hear, mobilizing climate finance, which might be one of the most important things of all. I'm going to introduce our guests in a second. We are going to be joined by one who's having trouble, ironically, technology trouble getting on the call, but we'll welcome him when he gets here. But first, housekeeping. As many of you will be familiar with, having attended think-ins before, it's all about you. It's not just about our guest speakers, much as we value them. This is about hearing as many different voices as possible in the course of the hour. Dive in the chat, but don't wait until the end of the hour to raise your digital hand if you specifically want to say something, because then we have a terrible rush where I want to let our guest speakers do some summing up as well, and I want to try and collect my own thoughts. And suddenly we've got a lot of people who want to be heard as well, and it would be great if you could raise your digital hands early on rather than leaving it till the last minute, because the point is all to learn from each other. I think that we have been joined by Henk Krootmans from Huawei, who are partnering with us for this session, and I'm very grateful to them for that. Can we just check that Henk's here? We need to look for the name Fumai Jin.
Thank you very much. Yes, my own wonderful Huawei laptop gave up. just about 5 minutes before I dialed in. So this is my colleague's laptop. Thank you very much for letting me in.
Hank, you'll forgive me a smile. I think the irony is just delicious. Thank you so much. Look, as I was just saying, thank you for partnering with us for this session. But I want to quote something that your colleague, Ryan Ding, who is executive director at Huawei, said in Dubai last week. He said, the whole industry will need to keep pursuing innovations in power supply, distribution, use and management, and build greener networks with higher performance and lower energy consumption. You may not have heard me saying by way of introduction, but you'll be well aware that there are plenty of projections for the power demand of the sector shooting right up as we install 5G, as companies like yours install 5G. So I'm tempted to translate Ryan Ding's remark as journalistically with something like, guys, we really, really have to be more efficient. Otherwise, we're going to be the bad guys in this whole debate. Give us a picture to answer just the simple question, how is the sector going to deliver those efficiencies? And then I do want to get on to the ways in which you believe the sector can also be the solution, not just part of the problem.
Thank you, Giles. I'll be short because I'm sure we're getting into the detail of various things, no doubt. I think the sector has clearly the duty, and we feel that the whole climate change is really a battle for the destiny of humanity, really. I think we all agree on that. In terms of ICT, it needs to improve itself, and as I said, we'll get to the detail, but it has the ability to do so, and I will say a bit more about technologies, but an example is 5G, which, for example, per bit is 10 times more efficient than 4G. But ICT also has the ability through its technology and innovation to really innovate and reduce the carbon footprint of other industries. So I would say it's our own industry and other industries. And I think it pretty much applies these days to any industry, from consumer to heavy industry, to any industry, transport, energy, you name it.
Yeah. Well, can I just pick you up on that one point? Per bit, 5G 10 times more efficient than 4G. I'm no mathematician nor a tech expert, but am I right in thinking that 5G is going to sort of flood the system with a much bigger than 10-fold increase in numbers of bits?
It has about 50 times more capacity, and it's more efficient in energy consumption. So just, make that a bit more practical. The wireless base stations will become 60 to 90% more energy efficient. And I think that's really important, of course. But of course, it's not just that. It's not just 5G. There are many other technologies. If we just focus on a communication technology, because that is important, because that, of course, determines how much stuff is being shipped around. It's also to do with photonics, fiber optic communications, because that's also hugely more efficient than we do now in many cases. Simply by itself, by the technology, but also, of course, to stimulate human behavior. If we give people a very good broadband connection, then their chances of working remotely, maybe working from home, having meetings remotely, is much greater. So we really do need these technologies, because one of the huge things is, of course, to change behavior of us all.
Right. Well, certainly in the slides that we had by way of introduction, apologies if you missed them, one line item was an estimate that a meeting conducted like this by Zoom will save 99.4% of the emissions that would have been generated if we'd all met in person. I find that very persuasive. But can you just briefly sort of pick out the broad areas besides enabling us to work from home where you envisage 5G specifically offering potential to shrink not just the tech sector's carbon footprint, but others too. I mean, we hear about traffic management, we hear about smart grids. I don't know what I'm talking about when I say that. I don't know if there's any decent research to prove, for example, that if every car is hooked up to the Internet of Things, then we'll be much lighter with our feet on the gas. Is that true? Help me out as a generalist here.
I think it's good questions, because I think it is sometimes very difficult to envisage what's really going on through all the numbers that are being bantered around. And I think on this call, I'm sure we'll issue some more numbers. But take the Internet of Things, because there's a lot been said about that. And I think, if I may, give you a few practical examples. Some research has been done that traffic in cities, in the big cities, 1/3 of it is really traffic looking around for a parking place. If we had a good Internet of Things in the city, including hooking up spare parking places to your information system in your car, then that could be massively reduced. Transport is a huge generation of CO2 emissions, and whether that's in cities or whether it's a long haul through telematics. Internet of Things, even though it's been bantered around for many years, actually the practical implementation is only now really happening with technologies such as 5G. Give you just one little snippet, if I may. Again, apologies, numbers. But personally, I was here in the UK. We created a technology called NB-IoT, or at least we created technology that was the start of NB-IoT, narrowband IoT. It means a sensor, the whole unit can be in situ for 10 years on a single battery. It is completely transformative if you compare that to existing technologies. That means that IoT devices, what, as I said, we've been talking about for a long time, can actually be deployed where we need them to measure, to monitor what we do, and to also help us, again, to change our behavior, whether that's looking for a free parking space, or whether it's actually to monitor what an industry, a manufacturing plant is doing, or a truck is doing. So I think there are some real transformative steps are happening with 5G. It's going to take still some time to deploy it all, but you need enabling technologies to start off with. And I'm sure later on, we will come to some other enabling technologies as well.
But just to be sure I understand that NB-IoT, that's presumably a unit that is recharged multiple times over the course of that 10 years. You're just saying that the battery doesn't have to be replaced. No, I misunderstood.
Correct. If you, the whole target with the technology, and we've achieved that, is it can work, a device can work for 10 years on a single battery charge. And actually,
so what sort of device might that be?
So that could be anything from really boring smart meters, which nevertheless we all need, to environmental monitors, flood defense monitors. The list goes on, really. I mean, it's like an enabling technology as part of the 5G suite, and we've even installed systems where it uses hardly any battery at all anymore, because a tiny little solar cell the size of a fingernail will top up the battery sufficiently. These are huge step changes, and we see that in other areas too, where we now get technologies that can really make a difference. In other areas, again, like the processor technologies, which I'm sure we'll come on to, we're still somewhat off, but we can see some real breakthroughs happening. Know where we need to go. Existing architecture, simply we cannot continue with that, but those technologies will happen too. And I think the area of photonics is going to be extremely important, not just in fiber optic communications as we know it in broadband to your house, but also in server farms, where it will unlock bottlenecks of data exchange and hugely optimize data centers and reduce the CO2 emissions.
Well, that's very interesting. says he. I sort of get a sense that that's important, and I'm sure we will come onto that, or I'll invite other people to come onto it. Tanish, I see you in the chat, and I want to come back to your question because I realize you've asked a question and I've used a number and I don't know the answer. So, but first, I want to introduce Alastair Marke, our next guest. Alastair is Director General of the Blockchain and Climate Institute, which is actually, well, based, you say, all over the world, but you are actually in Glasgow with Glasgow behind you. And I hope to see you up there next week. Alastair, you explained to me when we were on a call before this that although your organization, which is a think tank essentially, is called the Blockchain and Climate Institute, just because blockchain is what drives cryptocurrencies does not mean that is your sort of unique area of expertise. And I wanted, if you don't mind, to start with something fairly specific, which is the potential that you described for blockchain, and please feel free to give a quick explanation of what it is for people who are just still at the starting point there, for blockchain to unlock climate finance. Because it seems to me that if it is true that blockchain can release a sort of an order of magnitude more money or direct it towards green investments than is currently being directed, then in that sense, technology could really move into the hero column. Is that
okay? Yeah, of course.
Too much to deal with in one go?
No, that's fine. Yeah. So, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for having me. To start with, as a very brief introduction or the shortest definition of a blockchain, which is a type of distributed ledger technology. Blockchain is obviously a distributed ledger, or in layman terms, a decentralized database. So we can transact directly on a peer-to-peer basis without any intermediary in a traditional centralized transaction system. So we can transact anything on value on a blockchain network. So this is the shortest introduction to the concept of blockchain. So in terms of how blockchain technology can unlock climate finance, we can see there's a huge potential globally. The use of blockchain could help mobilize and democratize climate finance through mainly green asset tokenization, such as a new model of issuing and monitoring the green bonds. The use of big data.
You called it green asset tokenization?
Yes.
Okay. You'll have to explain what that is.
Yeah. Yeah, so in the climate market, we have a lot of green products or green exchanges. Like in the carbon market, we have to trade a carbon credit between party A and party B. Yeah, and all sorts of green products or green projects are green assets conceptually. So on a blockchain network, we turn them into a digital asset through a thing, something called tokenization. So probably as a lot of you have heard of tokens, coins, when you watch or read technology news in the last couple of years. So if we want to put a blockchain into the green finance or all sorts of climate related transactions, then we have the choice to make all these green assets represented with a token. So the professional term here is tokenization, because we could tokenize these supposedly physical assets into digital assets. So the use of big data and blockchain, for example, in a green bond setting, is to verify how green a green bond really is. there are a lot of forms that green bonds exist. In any case, the green bond market is still finding its feet, in our opinion. The World Bank issued the first labeled green bond only back in 2008, which followed an equity-linked issue by the European Investment Bank in 2007. Since then, there have been plenty more first. The first private sector bank green bond, the first sovereign green bond, the first corporate issuer of green bond, the first North American issues, Chinese, Indian, and many other countries have been following suit.
Mm-hmm.
And green bonds have taken off in a big way, and at current growth rates will comprise over 15% of the global corporate bond markets in a couple of years' time. But the value add on of blockchain or a wider distributed ledger technology in mobilizing climate finance could be first demonstrated through the monitoring, reporting, and verification of where the green bond proceeds have gone, to make sure that we do not invest in only greenwashing projects. Right. So the increased focus.
Alastair, can I just jump in and interrupt and ask you for an example that the general listener would understand? By the general listener, I mean me. When you're talking about verifying how green a green bond is, are we talking about a bond that might be based on a green project like reforestation or afforestation, which is sold as an offset, but you need to be clear that it is locking up the amount of carbon that it says it's locking up? Is that the kind of thing?
Yes, correct.
And so clearly blockchain has a role there, but also do you need people or remote sensing, or how else do you do it?
Yeah, this is quite a good question. So actually, it echoes what Henk have just said around IoT devices. So blockchain or distributed ledger technology cannot be any effective if it's used alone. We need to complement a blockchain with a lot of other emerging digital technology, particularly Internet of Things or remote sensing. So to take the example of a afforestation project. So right now, we have to send people to the forest to ascertain whether the defined area of forests have been well protected, particularly in the context of the REDD+, which is a part of the UN initiative to provide financial incentive for the local stewards to stop cutting down trees. But when we put all of them on a blockchain network, we could deploy something called smart contracts on a blockchain, which automates the transfer of the donor funding or investors' money to the local steward only after those IoT devices, for example, or satellite imagery or any remote sensing devices confirm that the forests are really conserved to the standard that have been agreed before the afforestation project starts. But by so doing, all these data collected from these IoT or remote sensing devices can automatically feed into the smart contract as an oracle. And the oracle here is used to trigger this smart contract automation process to transfer money only after certain predefined criteria are met. So in a way that both investors and consumers or any other stakeholders will be able to build up a lot more trust or confidence to make sure that these afforestation projects are real and they are really doing what they're supposed to do. And this is what's actually needed to build up a trust among many other climate investment markets.
Thank you very much, Alastair. Before I come to Chris, I just wanted to invite Tanish Saha, if you'd like, to dive in, because you've been busy in the chat. Hello, and saying, among other things, that you think offsets should be a last resort. What do you make of what of the picture that Alastair is creating of essentially an interesting collision between low-tech carbon sequestration on the ground and incredibly high-tech monitoring systems. Do you find it plausible?
I mean, hi everyone, and I'm sorry if it's noisy. But yeah, I mean, I think it's a great ideal situation, but I'm currently doing a module on biodiversity. So we've been talking a lot about offsets and versus just trying to keep ecosystems intact and trying to do projects in other locations. So again, the key concern that I think when it comes to implementing blockchain technology to verify and keep up with conservation projects is whether, I don't know who's going to bear the cost. Is it going to be the proprietors or the people offering the green bonds who are going to invest in this IoT framework? It's management and upkeep, which I think becomes a significant cost and a barrier even when it comes to someone who's trying to conserve forests on the ground. Yes, they're receiving monetary payment, which is dependent on whether they meet this criteria. But I feel in areas where there is risk biodiversity, technology can also maybe serve as a barrier to actually becoming a part of these programs. I don't know if that makes sense.
Well, Tanish, thank you. It's an interesting question. So Chris, let me come to you. Imagine yourself in low Earth orbit, looking down not just on our forests but on this debate. I mean, Henk and Alastair are right at the coalface, as it were, and I think we can all accept that we can't uninvent technology, and it's got to be a part of the solution. But are we at risk of being snowed here?
Well, yes, I think there's a significant problem here, because what these technologies are doing essentially is to try to enable us to continue to live our lives exactly as we've been doing in the past, with no significant changes. Yes, 5G is going to be good. It's going to introduce major new benefits to us. We're going to be able to do things that we can't do currently with mobile phone networks. But there is going to be significant energy rebound. Although, as Henk said, the average bit transmitted is going to take a lot less energy than in 4G, and certainly even more so with previous incarnations of mobile phone networks. But we're going to use so much more data in this process that there will be no huge saving in electricity consumption. The next question to ask, I suppose, is, does electricity consumption matter? That's the one thing that we can clearly decarbonize quickly. So if by improving our technology, we can transfer things from being not based on electricity to using electricity, then we can make decarbonization much easier. I'm not quite certain how blockchain will do that. And my concern with innovations, important innovations such as 5G, is that they simply allow us to continue down the old routes without addressing the significant changes to the way we run our lives that are going to be important parts of the decarbonization transition, the decarbonization journey.
Thank you, Chris. And by the way, I failed to introduce you properly as the sort of founder and editor of Carbon Commentary, author of many books on related to climate and the energy transition. And you're an investor yourself in the sector, are you not?
Yes, and one of the companies that I've invested in with great enthusiasm, a company called Oxwash, which operates automated, very low carbon laundry systems, is actually based upon the Internet of Things. There's no question about that. So I absolutely understand that these technologies can be very useful indeed in moving from resource-intensive, energy-intensive activities to being pretty close to carbon neutral. And Oxwash is the first company in the world that's able to do this, aided by huge investment in Internet of Things type products. So I'm not necessarily quite the technological dinosaur that I might sometimes seem.
Thanks, Chris. You've never struck me as a dinosaur, to the contrary. I'd like, if possible, to come to Emma Jackson in a moment, because I think you've raised a couple of really interesting points. One of them, just the sort of barrier to entry to the whole conversation when it's about technical stuff. But first, I want to come back to Alastair, if I may, just because we didn't address the specific issue of the power demands and carbon footprint of blockchain. Well, let's address the elephant in the room: blockchain when used for cryptocurrencies. Again, I'm no expert. All I'm aware of is these stories of crypto mining outfits that used hundreds and hundreds of servers having to be planted directly over thermal power supply, thermal power stations, in order to get a lot of cheap power. I know it's a small part of the larger debate, but are we looking there at a exponentially growing power demand that, if not decarbonized, as Chris was suggesting, will suddenly kind of ambush us?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, thank you for your question. Yes, of course. I think Chris raised a very valid point. If we put this question into the context of the what I would say blockchain 1.0, which was based on the initial consensus mechanism called a proof of work. Proof of work, just for everybody's information, proof of work is a consensus mechanism to validate transactions on the blockchain. And it is the original consensus algorithms in the blockchain network used to confirm the transaction and create a new block to the chain. And mainly, it does it mainly through mathematical puzzles to be solved by all the miners or group of computers in competitions to create a valid block and be rewarded. This is the technical principle of how proof of work consensus mechanism works. And the energy requirements of the hardware or data center actually has been quite high. This is the fact because of the intensive task called mining, as you rightly mentioned. Yeah, and I totally agreed that this was a problem in the past. However, there has been a lot of progress in the technologist efforts to help decarbonize or minimize the energy consumption of blockchain or DLT through some newer consensus mechanisms. For example, there have been some private or consortium blockchains provided by Corda, Hyperledger, and Ripple. And as the nodes are already known, among the private consortium on the blockchain, verified and trusted as well, private consortium blockchain do not require mining to verify transactions. And
so do they use much less power?
Yeah, they're a lot less, or even almost zero. Yeah, and there's because I mean there are a lot fewer numbers of nodes, means a lot less energies are required to run the blockchain, and greater performance in terms of scalability, speed, and data throughput. And another a new important concept is called proof of stake, STAKE, proof of stake. Proof of stake is a new consensus mechanism developed by an algorithm platform. It's a public blockchain that runs on a version of proof of stake that drive electricity consumption to almost zero. Yeah, so so now I can say that with those advancements of consensus mechanism techniques like proof of stake or sharding on different blockchain as a service platform, so the energy consumption problems I think is being resolved pretty efficiently.
Thank you, Alastair. And I mean, for everyone, I acknowledge that this is kind of highly specific, and if you'll forgive me, it's on the nerdy end of the nerd spectrum. But I think it's really important because so often in this whole sector, lay people, users, consumers, generalists begin to become aware of a problem at a point at which it is already being solved. and that may be the case, but that's why I wanted to bring in Emma if I can, just for solidarity's sake. I wonder if, hi, Emma. You make the point about sort of concern about access to technology and access to understanding the technology. Would you like to expand on that a little bit? I mean, bearing in mind that we do all use it, don't we, all the time? Is that what makes you uneasy, that we're using this stuff and we don't quite understand it?
Well, A, there's the using of the stuff and not understanding it. B, increasingly, we're being asked to be part of the buy into the solution. So going forward, adopting and embracing technology. And like many things, you summed it up brilliantly, Giles, when you just said, as lay people, we stumble into these conversations without necessarily the background and the understanding. But that's not abnormal for academic tech worlds or tech solutions. What I think is really important is having those intermediaries who can translate the speak so that we can become more understanding. And I do have a concern about that ability to directly communicate with the layperson in plain speak, so that they too can be part of the solution and embrace it more readily. I'm lost in a lot of this conversation, so which means I have to go away and look it up and learn more. I'm happy to do that, but I would like to understand more.
Well, do check in the chat for links which colleagues and other Tortoise members are putting up there, which some of them will help. I think there was an explainer on green bonds in there. But sorry, go ahead. Yes.
But Giles, that raised a really good point, because I clicked on a link. I just clicked on one of the links, and I've had on my Apple iPad Pro a warning coming up saying that this connection is not secure. So it's a really good example of then where I go, well, what are you sharing? How can I evaluate this? Do I trust Apple? Do I trust Tortoise? Where do I go with this?
Completely fair question. Which link is that? The Investopedia one?
I can't remember now. It's one of the bigger ones, but I can put it back in the chat. But it is one of the earlier ones that you shared. Okay.
Well, my advice is don't click on it until we've made sure that it's okay. But let me ask you, Emma, back to the original headline question. What is your gut feeling on whether and focusing on carbon emissions, on whether the substantial footprint of the tech sector, substantial and growing as we all use it more and adopt 5G because that's what's on sale, and because it makes a lot of things possible, whether that is more than offset by the potential in various areas that we've heard about for sort of mass scale efficiencies. Are you persuaded of that broad argument?
Well, like anything at the moment, it's nuanced, and so I'm not completely persuaded. I agree with partly what Chris said, is that it's looking at our behaviour as a society and how we consume, and modifying that, and then using tech to help us support that. It's a two-way approach. Right.
Thank you very much. I'd like to come back to Henk, if possible, if the link is still up. I mentioned, I think before you joined us, Henk, that John Kerry, among others, and he is the US climate envoy, has explicitly put his faith in technologies that he acknowledges haven't been invented yet. So if we take a step back from 5G and look at carbon mitigation technologies generally, do you think it's safe to adopt that kind of approach, or just realistic to adopt that kind of approach, given the urgency of the carbon emissions question at hand?
Yeah, I think it's, to be honest, I think it's twofold. You can't just say, oh, we're going to wait for those technologies that haven't been invented yet. But let me come back to that in a minute. You do have to apply, of course, all the capabilities you have now. If we take completely the attitude of, well, we need to have those amazing technologies that will come up later, then of course that's too late. And that's why companies like ourselves, we do change how, for example, data centers consume energy through special cooling systems that reduce the energy consumption by a huge amount. And as I mentioned before, photonics technologies that can really change things, not just in communication on broadband, but also in data centers. But when you do look forward to those technologies that John Kerry probably alludes to, I think we all in the industry know that processors, and we find them everywhere, from data centers to your smartphone and wherever else, are simply designed in the standard way that's been done many, many decades before. And bluntly, fairly inefficient. They could be much, much better. They'll have to be much better. If we start to provide technologies like blockchain and artificial intelligence, etc., onto processes that we currently have in our hand, it just simply will not be sustainable. We need car batteries hanging off it. So therefore, the whole industries need to look at these new technologies, such as new processor design, which again will transform the whole energy consumption, whether that's stuff that we already know about, such as in-memory computing, or complete new architectures, both at processor level and at data center level and at device level. Definitely we need to do that. We only have to look around at ourselves, whether it's our brain or that of an ant. They are so much more powerful than actually what we're doing at processor level. And these are new technologies, but they're not going to come about today, and we need to act today. And that's why we have technologies such as 5G, which is makes a huge difference. And hugely future technologies will again. Technologies that improve the powertrain of electric cars, as we've done, which hugely reduce the capacity or the energy required for a car. Or a cooling system.
Is that right? I'm really fascinated about that. Just tell me about that, because there's a time is going to come when I own an electric car. I look forward to it. Can't do it yet, but I'm still, and I don't have range anxiety in the conventional sense, but I am acutely aware that we need some technological breakthroughs to compensate for the fact that batteries are so much less energy dense than petrol, right? Are you saying that we're already doing that with the processes that manage them?
Yes, with the current technology, and we have to act now, with the current technology is improving all the time, whether that is to charge the battery or to convert various power sources to electric, or to charge the battery, or therefore discharge through more efficient powertrains. The whole chain is constantly being improved with, sometimes you think these are small numbers. You know, we have a current powertrain which is increased efficiency from 86 to 89%. Doesn't sound a lot, but if you increase the range of a car by 4.5%, or in other words, the same journeys take 4.5% less energy, that's a huge amount when you look at how many cars there are, and not just cars, trucks and everything, because no doubt they'll become electric too. So yes, it's very easy. We can shoot at the big numbers, and we have to, but also we need to plug away at this whole thing all across the board. Even the small numbers make an enormous difference. We can't just wait. We can't wait.
Right. In a second, I would love to come to Daniel Dolf-Steinberg, because I think you know a lot more. You definitely know a lot more about 5G than me, and I'd be interested to know more about what you think of as its potential. But briefly, Henk, you've mentioned photonics twice. This is one of those thinkings when we can get into the weeds. What are photonics?
Well, again, you know, without going into the explanation of the detailed technology, but it's effectively transmitting signals using light rather than electricity. And it
isn't that what fiber optics does anyway?
Exactly. That's what I mentioned. So that's an important thing which will improve our broadband connections and therefore allow us to do more things like remote working. But these technologies can also be used elsewhere, such as on a chip, in data centers, in servers, making them much more efficient, because actually what's going on in servers can be actually really inefficient, whether it's bottlenecks in data transfer. And by having faster transfers in data centers, you reduce a huge amount of wasted energy there.
All right, great. Thank you so much. Daniel, if you're there, you seem to be a fan. Hello.
Hi.
You've gone into the chat on 5G and also on the different requirements of different cryptos. But tell us what you think 5G means in terms of global carbon emissions.
Well, technology has been dematerializing a lot of what we have. So, you know, an iPhone today or any smartphone will have in it things, hundreds of items that we used to have physically: a torch, a record player, a radio player, a voice recorder, a telephone. And so all these items that we used to have are being shrunk by technology. The two final pieces of what makes a phone large are, one, the processing power, that it has to have processing power, it has to have batteries, and it also has to be upgraded a lot because every year the processing power increases, etc. And the second is the screen size, and the screen size is, they're actually becoming bigger, so we have a bigger screen. But the processing power could actually be eliminated or reduced if everything were in the cloud. And that's not possible at the moment because the transfer in and out of a phone is too slow for us to have everything in the cloud, and it's not always on, and it's not always fast, and you can't rely on it. So potentially, or technologies like 5G and then 6G and then whatever comes after it will be so fast that actually everything can be stored in the cloud, which means that phones could actually be reduced to almost nothing, and which allows, you know, a further dematerialization, so they could actually be, I mean, heaven forbid, but they could be actually integrated into us. And, you know, if you can eliminate the screen with contact lenses or something, that will allow that first thing, which means more items can be reduced and therefore shipped. But secondly, it allows the upgrade path to be reduced because you won't need to upgrade your device as frequently if all the upgrades are done seamlessly in the cloud. And that's really what I was trying to highlight with 5G. No, I'm not an expert on how 5G works. It's just the principle of it.
The dematerialization. I have an awful feeling that I'm a part of this. I was saying to Chris and Alastair before we came on that my son has just received for his 21st birthday a pair of Ray-Bans with Facebook-friendly video cameras right up here. I can't believe that I've been a party to that sort of transaction, but it comes to a broader point that I want to raise with all three of our guests before we run out of time. And anybody else who wants to pitch in, do that thing where you raise your digital hand. You know how to do that. I should have said at the beginning. You touch your reactions button and the hand comes up. But we're way deep into an era in which technology races ahead of most people's conception of what is possible. And as consumers, we're playing catch up, constantly realizing, oh yeah, I could use that. Not necessarily I have to use that, but yeah, I could use that. And I wonder if that ever ends. And if not, then what does that mean? Again, bringing it back to this planetary emergency that we face. What does that mean for carbon emissions? Chris, can I start with you on this somewhat ill-formed and metaphysical question about our relationship with invention?
Yeah, we're all a lot better off as a result of these inventions, aren't we, Giles? There's absolutely no question about it. Our standard of life has improved markedly. Unfortunately, I suspect we've pretty much come to the end. Just to use one example, if I may, Hank quite rightly mentioned that improvements in Huawei technology are going to mean that our efficiency of charging a car might move up from 85% to 89%. So we get 4.5% more travel per unit of electricity. But the world has got to the point now where we don't need slightly better efficiency in our cars, I would hypothesize. We need to decide whether we want as many cars, whether we actually have to travel less. Those cars are costing 10 tons approximately. These big electric vehicles are costing 10 tons of CO2 per car to be made. We really actually need to fundamentally change the way we're living, not just look for marginal improvements in energy efficiency.
Right, key point. We lose sight of the distinction between what we might want if persuaded and what we actually need, and what the planet can support. Alastair, you're right at the cutting edge. How do you, this is really not a question about the business that you're in. It's a question about the world that you're in. Do you think we can ever slow down the pace of invention sufficiently to allow the planet to catch up, as it were?
I believe fundamentally technologists or innovators have to probably alter their strategy of invention rather than slowing down the invention timescale. So I really agree with a lot of points that our audience, the other fellow speakers have raised. We definitely have to avoid ending up with a catch-22 situation where we solve one problem that but the solution becomes another new problem that we have to solve. So it really depends on whether we can really successfully decarbonize our tech sector. Really depends on the new mentality that technologists needs to have when they design the products to really meet the genuine needs of the target consumers. And also when the consumer got new devices, yeah, it really depends on how they want to use it with sustainability in mind. So I think this is quite a philosophical question. Yeah, but it is a good question for a lot more discussions.
Before I come to Henk, can we come to Luke Richards? You've mentioned in the chat the directionality of technologies, and I wanted to ask what you meant by that. We're faced with multiple pathways, and we need to democratize where we lead them. Is this, Luke, are you there? You still with us? Perhaps not. No worries. Henk, let me come to you, because what Alastair has just said, and I think it's what certainly is on my mind. I mean, Alastair made the point that whether we can decarbonize the tech sector depends partly on on how it assesses the needs of its consumers. And I submit that another way of framing this is the sector going to police itself in this regard, or should we have been spending half of this time talking about government regulation of the sector as the only way to ensure that it does look that it does prioritize sustainability sufficiently?
Yeah, I think that all these things connect together. If I may, the point that Alastair was making earlier on, if we can have technologies like blockchain, which effectively the equivalent of digital fingerprint and digital watermarking of data, it should, with a combination of IoT in a large scale, actually provide information, democratized information, I would like to think, which will steer us on to what Chris was talking about, which is actually put it in the hands of the consumer, of the users, of the businesses to be better informed and actually say, no, I don't want to use this technology, I don't want to use this system because I'm not happy with its carbon footprint. I can live in a different way, or I can work in a different way. And of course, ultimately, it informs society as well as governments, because, and that's really important that it does, because let's not forget, the reason why we're here today having this discussion is because we've got these amazing young people who basically telling us this is what you got to do. And we got to provide through technology this democratized information that actually, as Alice was saying, allows us exactly to say whether that's simply a supply chain to Huawei, where we already work with 100 suppliers to have a target for carbon reduction, but then they actually can check it, or whether we simply monitor the environment and might make that available, that information available to people to say, hey, you city owners or city government, you need to do something different, etc. I think it all sits together. I don't think it's one bit or another bit. It all needs to work together. Really important. I do think that the technologies are ready there now. Yes, Carrie is right. There will be new technologies that we don't even know about it yet, but we can't wait for that.
One final thing, Henk. Chris made the point that in principle, the entire question of the tech sector's carbon footprint can be solved by decarbonizing global power supply. In other words, by turning every patch of ocean that is not used by shipping into a giant wind farm. Are you ultimately, in all candor, from where you sit, somewhat reliant on that happening?
As an ICT industry, you mean?
Yeah.
I think that's a difficult thing to answer. If I look simply here in the UK, where were we 15, 20 years ago? Everybody was sort of looking at the first wind farm or wind turbine and thinking, yeah, interesting, but never going to happen. Here we are 15 years later, and we're now looking at roughly 50% of our electricity need being generated by renewable energy. Well, can we do this a bit quicker, and maybe even quicker be having no reliability anymore on fossil fuel for electricity? That I think is not just good for the ICT industry, it's good for everyone. But at the same time, you can't just sit there waiting for that. You've got to do something about consumption. And I think that is partly how the technology uses energy, but also how technology can help steer behavior.
All right, well, thank you very much. Look, everybody, we are at the top of the hour. Emma, I am with you on the challenge that we all face if we're not a part of this world in getting our heads around it. But I think we have to, and I hope that the past hour has helped us do that. I, as always, cast an eye over my notes with a, in our headquarters, we have these highlighters to pick out what is of immediate interest to me. And there's been a heck of a lot. I mean, Henk started out by suggesting that we're in a battle for the destiny of humanity. And I think that's, I think the more businesses that go to COP with that at the front of their minds, the better. Another wonderful piece of data that a third of traffic is cars looking for parking spots. That may be off by a matter of degree, but I can't believe that it's not broadly accurate. And it reminds us that there are wasteful behaviors that if we could just wrestle to the ground, we could make a real difference with. One subject that we touched on, but I confess we didn't really dig into, is the potential of blockchain to democratize climate finance. But I do think that that's going to be a big question in COP, because as Alastair and I were discussing before, we aren't even to the point of mobilizing the 100 billion per year that was promised in Paris. But if, on the other hand, technology can help match up the trillions that are looking for green investments and the investments themselves, then it seems to me there is a potential for technology to, for the benefits to vastly outweigh any immediate carbon costs. I was really struck by Daniel's reference to the dematerialization of technology by technology, as it were. And yeah, as mentioned, you mentioned contact lenses. My son already has these glasses, quite expensive, but they did go down well as a birthday present. And Alastair finally mentioned the catch-22 situation that I think we're all in, which is one in which every new technological innovation has the potential to create new problems as well as solving old ones. And which brings us back to where we ended with Henk, really. Everybody in the sector, I think, has an obligation to think harder about the long-term impact of what they're doing, and not simply take it for granted that technology can be the solution to everything, even though we can't uninvent it. I hope that doesn't sound too Luddite. I'm not a Luddite. I fully accept that we use all these amazing, miraculous technologies every day and would rather not be without them. Thank you very much for joining us. Do keep a track of what Tortoise is doing as we approach COP and go through COP. We'll be producing a net zero Sensemaker every day while we're there, and we'll try and keep them gossipy so that you don't get bored, whatever else happens at Glasgow. Thanks once again, especially to our guests, Chris, Alastair and Henk. Thank you so much for joining us, and see you again soon.